Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to have you on board. We're not in the classroom today. I'm here at Brooks Capital Office, and I'm going to be talking to you for the next hour or so, maybe an hour and a half. I know that's difficult, Friday afternoon, everybody's tired, but we're going to go over some topics that you've already been introduced to. We've got to concentrate on them a little bit more, and then I'm going to introduce you to some topics, some issues that we're going to be discussing when we get together for our next class. That's on Monday night. And I'm going to leave warehousing for last today. What I'd like to do right now, I'd like to turn to cargo insurance. And I've spoken about it in class. Some of you may be tired of hearing about it, but it is indeed very important. And I want you to concentrate on this because it's going to bring home the importance of Incoterms 2010. And that's very important for anybody who's in business. If you're in business, international and or domestic, you should know about Incoterms 2010. And getting back to insurance, in order to understand insurance, again, you need Incoterms 2010. But you've also, many of you have to get over an aversion to having insurance. Most Americans, most people all over the world don't particularly like insurance companies. When you do buy insurance, it is a feeling that any kind of insurance is a grudge purchase. You have to have it. You probably won't use it, and it's costly. That's so in certain cases, but when it comes to international trade, when it comes to marine cargo insurance, which also covers air and other forms of transportation, it's actually very cheap. And you should have insurance no matter what type of transportation you're involved in. And I have down on the first sheet, as you can see, it could be local, could be transportation street to street, city to city, town to town shipment. It could be within the state, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. It could also be within the country. We're talking about a national shipment. It could be from New York to California, California to New York, or it could involve a regional trade bloc. Let's think of NAFTA, which is currently under attack, or let's think about the European Union, which a lot of people don't have much faith in, but is a big player in the world. How does insurance work? And then again, you've got to think about global trade between or among countries. In particular, think about trade between the United States and the People's Republic of China and vice versa. For those who've been following the news, you know that President Trump is threatening China. China is also threatening the United States. From what I understand today, President Trump is talking about $100 billion in additional duties on goods coming into the United States. If that happens, it's going to be a lot of fun. Trade wars, however, are not fun, and they also affect things like transportation. And your insurance may be affected as well because of additional duties being placed on the products, the items that are being imported or exported. And you got to know that, you know there are several modes and types of trade or shipments around the world, and you realize if you're shipping internationally, just about everything is multimodal. It means if you have an item that's leaving the port of Philadelphia, well, you first got to pick it up from a warehouse in and around Philadelphia. Then it's got to be trucked. Where's it usually going? It could be going to a terminal like Mart Terminal at the Port of New York in Newark. Fine, a truck's got to take it there. Then the goods, which should be containerized, will be in about 98–99% of the cases. Well, that container is going to be laden, that is loaded aboard a ship, and a crane is involved. Again, today the government is very careful about weight restrictions, wants to make sure that containers are not overloaded, and it's going to be placed on a vessel. Then the vessel is going to go over an ocean, may encounter heavy seas, bad conditions. It's going to wind up at a terminal on the other side of the world. Then that container has to be offloaded, has to be placed on a truck chassis, or perhaps goes on rail. It could be transported by rail. Sometimes transportation by truck or rail can be okay, but quite often it can be difficult. All kinds of stresses and strains are placed on the cargo. All kinds of physical damage can take place. You heard me last class, what's the most common type of damage? Well, it's wet damage. We've talked a little bit about container rain. Differences in temperature outside of the container and inside can make for difficult times. Now you see a few icons, an image below. How does cargo damage occur? Well, again, it can happen any number of ways, and that's what I'm going to emphasize again. There are all kinds of forces that you've got to deal with. And the same thing when you're in business or anything you do in life. There are forces you can control, there are forces you cannot control. But no matter what you do when it comes to transportation, logistics, you got to think about insurance. Not to have it, big gamble. All right, a carrier uses a CTU. Some of you may have never heard this term before. It means cargo transporting unit, which may be an ocean container. It can be an igloo. For those of you who've been around planes, you know that igloos are used. We're not talking about the type you can find on the North Pole, but we're talking about an aluminum steel container. And the airlines place items within that igloo, and that's placed in the belly of a plane. We could be talking about railway cars. We could talk about any other kind of container, similar container used in intermodal transport for the transportation of goods. The cargo is packed inside a CTU, and it's going to go through a lot of motions. Some of them may be gentle, but quite often they can be very brutal. And this is particularly so if things are traveling by road, rail, or sea. And now we're going to take a look at some of the movements because it is important to understand. And road movement. Everybody's familiar with trucks and what trucks do. And if you consider the movement of cargo by or over road, there are several forces acting on the cargo during transport caused by the movement of a truck. And again, movement is often affected by the state of the condition of roads. As you all know, in the United States right now, we have to address infrastructure. Our roads are in bad shape. And if you live in a metro area, you know that. But cargo can experience all kinds of forces while they're traveling. And those include gravitational force. And there's a depiction below of gravitational force. Just follow the arrow. There's frictional force. There's also random deceleration. There's random acceleration, centrifugal force, and of course, vibrations can also have a truly negative impact on whatever it is that you're carrying. That's why, as we spoke last time, we talked a lot about packaging. Anytime goods are going to be packaged for intermodal transport, they have to be packaged correctly. And Incoterms does not really address the issue of packaging. You will have to get together, if you're the seller, with the buyer. And again, ask the buyer, what kind of packaging? How are these goods being transported? Because if goods are sold ex works, that's from the seller's factory, the seller might be unaware of the fact that an international transit is going to take place. He may think that his goods are just going to be sold domestically. And putting things into a domestic truck and then getting them packaged for international transportation by ocean and international transportation by rail, two different things. And again, talking about the forces, you can see even with the truck, forces can cause sliding, tipping, or other movement of cargo. Last class, I indicated to you that you go around the Port of New York and you can see trucks on occasion have been turned over. They're on their sides. Why? The truck driver took a sharp turn. The cargo inside the container shifted, may have hit a wall. Maybe the truck was traveling at a high speed, trying to go around a bend. Look at the depiction of centrifugal force. What then happens is the container, goods, the cargo that's loaded in the container, go to one side of the container, helps pull the truck down to its side. And quite often, there'll be emergency services there, police, and quite often it takes a long time to get a truck uprighted again. But what about the cargo in the container? Many times it's ruined. It can't be used. I mean, the voyage has just started and the cargo is already destroyed. Should there be insurance covering the truck transportation? The answer is yes. Unfortunately, many exporters, many shippers don't bother to get insurance because they want to save a few dollars. And if you look in the scheme of things, what is one of the cheapest links in international supply, global trade supply? Well, on the export side or the import side, it's marine insurance. Again, it covers all different kinds of modes of transportation. And the other cheap link is customs brokerage on the importing side. It doesn't cost a lot to get your shipment cleared. That is by a customs broker. But if you don't have your goods packaged correctly, and the container winds up being offloaded, and there's an examination at the terminal, you may have to spend a lot of time repackaging the goods, or maybe in certain cases, the party who's taking the goods doesn't want them. is going to reject the goods. The goods can wind up being abandoned. And you may not get paid, or there may be a huge claim against you. And if you don't have insurance, you have to say to yourself, where am I going to get the money? Because you realize that sometimes with a container shipment, there could be tens of thousands of dollars worth of goods in that container. In many cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, millions of dollars worth of damage. Where are you going to get the money to cover that? As we spoke about in class, if you turn over the reverse side of a bill of lading, you're going to see terms and conditions. You've noticed that there is a limit. Most shippers want to protect themselves. And the most that they're going to pay if you don't have cargo insurance is $500. And that's not, we're not referring to, per item, whatever it is that's in a container. We're talking about whatever in a container is the total value is going to not, the value, the damages that are going to be covered by the shipper will not exceed $500. And good luck trying to collect that. Okay, movement by rail. Rail, as I've mentioned in the past, is a cheap way of transporting. It's very cheap. The only thing that's cheaper than that is ocean transportation. Again, about 95% of all items coming into the US move by ocean. But if you're on anywhere near the border, you will notice that quite a bit comes into the country by rail. And as far as rail goes, yes, government companies need to address rail. It would be nice if the United States had bullet trains, it had better rails, but rail is cheap and most times it's pretty reliable. And when it comes to the movement of cargo, which is better described as freight if you're using trains, there are several forces acting on a cargo during transport caused by the movement of the rail car. There's always going to be a lot of vibration. What really counts sometimes is the speed of the train, and sometimes it's the lack of the speed of the train. Quite often goods get damaged because the train makes unexpected stops. And then there's a great big shift within the rail car, and things, if they're not tied down, if they're not strapped down, they get smashed to pieces. Or if you happen to be sharing a rail car with somebody else's goods, you may discover that your goods have been contaminated. Why? Because the other party's goods in the rail car may be perfume, or it could be hazmat, could be petroleum, could be anything. And things break, things leak. So if you're shipping things by rail freight, you got to realize that the freight can experience longitudinal and horizontal forces during braking and acceleration. That's probably the most common type of experience that the goods go through, the ones that truly put stress and strain on what's being carried. Then there's transverse horizontal forces. There's gravity. There's frictional force. And like with trucking, there's random deceleration, random acceleration. There's centrifugal force. Railway cars sometimes have to make very tight turns. And there's vibrations. And you've got to make certain that your goods are packed not just for one leg of the journey, but for all legs. And if you're traveling by rail, they're subject to all kinds of special strains and stresses. These forces, in the case of trucking, can cause sliding, tipping, and other movement of cargo that can seriously damage the cargo, other property, and possibly human beings. I know with a lot of the truck accidents, because of load shifts, people have been hurt, including especially the drivers. And the same thing can happen with rail cars. If they go off the rails, very common expression we use, off the rails, there can be all kinds of damage. Now, rail freight, again, has to be secured sufficiently to withstand all these forces en route. And we've talked about ocean containers, but the same thing goes for rail containers. Sometimes blocking and bracing are needed. Use of straps, use of chains, cords, all kinds of things. And if you've got boxes and they're traveling, you've got to think about making use of shrink wrap, shrink film. And then we get to probably the most important mode of transportation is movement by sea. And if you're in shipping or in the business of exporting, importing, it helps a little to understand, it helps to understand a little bit about the laws of physics as related to shipping and physics. That's what I've been on the screen. I've been trying to introduce you these forces. You got a few diagrams. You can see that velocity counts, inertia counts, all these things. And I keep mentioning ocean movement. And ocean to sea movement is the toughest on cargo. And you have a diagram. It shows you the 6 different ways that a ship, an ocean vessel, can travel. They can go in all kinds of different directions, and these directions, sometimes the force of them can truly damage goods. Ships can heave, that is, they go up and down. They're also subject to surge and swaying and yawing, which is very interesting. Pitching, they occasionally plunge into the ocean. And of course, ships roll. And as you know, ships can roll perhaps 40 degrees, and that quite often results in containers falling into the ocean. This happens quite a bit. The shipping industry doesn't like to talk about the loss of containers at sea, but they also happen, the loss also happens when ships are trying to dock, when they come into port. Quite often there are accidents. Maybe there's a difficult time. Maybe there are collisions. Quite often this happens in harbors as well, and containers are lost. As we talked about last time, when you do receive a container, you have to make sure that the container you receive is in fact worthy. Quite often containers have holes in them. I'm going to be sending you something that's put out by Customs and Border Protection. It's called a 17-point inspection, and it's what you should do when you receive a container. You've heard that when you receive a container, you should actually step into the container or have somebody from your company or somebody's comfortable doing so, close the doors, and then the eyes have to adjust to the darkness within the container. The person is looking for holes in the ceiling, holes in the side, holes in the floor. And you've got to use your nose too. Quite often there can be contamination because the container was not cleaned properly. And as I mentioned, quite often the floorboards are gouged. There are holes in them. There could be larvae, there can be bacteria, there can be things that can contaminate whatever it is that you're shipping. And you just may be shipping delicate items. Quite often that's wearing apparel, it could be textiles, it can be tobacco, it can be all kinds of things. Those items are easily contaminated. So you've got to, again, make certain that your goods are packaged correctly. And then quite often you get goods like heavy steel coils or granite. I've worked with a number of stone importers. There is load shifting, and quite often stone slabs shift, they bounce around within the container, they break. I've seen instances where containers have come into the country and the marble slabs, the granite slabs are useless. They've been broken up. They could be coming in from India, they could be coming in from Brazil. Maybe they were tied down, but maybe they weren't tied down correctly. Again, there's a lot of forces at work when something is being shipped. And quite often, the force winds up jarring loose whatever it is in the container, and the container and the goods suffer. And again, if you don't have insurance, you may be on a hook for not just the goods within the container, but you may have to pay for the container itself because of the damage caused by your items. Now, in terms of rolling ocean-going vessels, have been recorded. As I mentioned, they can roll up to 40 degrees, and you have to visualize coils, granite blocks, heavy items inside a container. And think about that container, or think about the ship listing at a 40-degree angle. That's a lot of listing. And the sidewalls are quite often battered. And as I mentioned, you can go to the port, and occasionally you can see a container at the port that looks like a bomb went off inside the container. That's because heavy items broke loose and were rolling around within the container. A lot of damage occurs when that happens. The reality of cargo insurance. I have a pie chart for you right now. I indicated that a lot of damage occurs because of wetness. We talk about wet damage. That's 9%. I said in class it's about 10%. 9–10% of all items that come in are damaged by wetness. And it may be due to seawater leaking into the containers, maybe because of what we call container rain, because of change in the temperature. I mentioned that when containers, when they're going over the equator, quite often such a thing called container rain it takes place because the outside temperature and the inside temperature of the containers differ, and what you get is compensation. But there's also shortages, and you see that shortages, about 8% of all goods that are coming into the country, when claims are filed, there's a claim shortage. Not everything is in a container. That's why many times you should have a private inspector looking at the stuffing of the container. Somebody should make sure the container is packed correctly and make sure that everything gets into the container. There's also sinking. There's quite often we mentioned that containers go off sides of ships. Sometimes when they're docking, that happens. mentioned contamination. They have it down as 2% pie chart. I think it happens to be a little bit more. And again, it's usually odors, but quite often it can be due to, well, broken bottles. Those bottles may be alcoholic in nature, they may be perfume, whatever. Could be too from the stuffing in the container. Forklifts often leak. They leak oil. And then when that oil gets into a container, it's, well, oil smells, or it could be some other kind of fluid, and it's going to contaminate whatever's in the container. Infestation, listed as being 1%. What we're really talking about here, bugs. But it could be talking about other types of vermin. We could be talking about rats. We could be talking about mice. I think the infestation rate has, yeah, maybe 1%, maybe a little bit higher. But infestation can actually stem from not the products that you put into the container, but because the container that you received was infested. It was an infestation. It could be in the floorboards. It could even be in the walls. You've got to do a look around when you receive that container. Make sure you get a clean container. You don't know who had the container before you get to use it. Physical damage, 28%. And that stems from all the physical forces that we've been talking about. Goods have to be packed for long-term transit. When you talk about ocean, what are we talking about? Well, a vessel may be on the ocean 8-9 days. Certain parts of the world that may take the vessel to get to the United States a lot longer. It could be, in some cases, 20 days, even 30 days. But you've got to make certain that things are physically packed and so as to avoid this physical damage. Reefer related, we talked about reefer containers. Reefer containers, refrigerated containers, very necessary in the transportation of food items. But a lot can go wrong with reefers. The temperature controls can be set incorrectly. Quite often ventilations get stuffed. Things don't go right. Sometimes the reefer is too warm. And I mentioned too that quite often people forget to do a pre-cooling. That is, before they put goods into the reefer, the goods should be cooled off. Quite often you can have goods that have been sitting in the sun or been sitting in a hot location. Make sure they're cool enough when they're stuffed in the reefer container. And also make sure too that when the reefer container is being stuffed, it's being done so in a place that has a moderate temperature. And you don't want the equipment on while the stuffing of the container is taking place. Also, containers lost overboard, look at that. 11% of all cargo damage claims relate to containers being lost overboard. It's a common occurrence. There's all kinds of other reasons here. I don't necessarily know what they are. It could just be because of gasketing around the doors, the seawater that gets in. Quite often cargo claims are made. It's not the carrier who's really responsible. It could be the trucker who picks up the container from the terminal. Maybe he's responsible for load shipping. Perhaps that's where something went wrong, or perhaps something went wrong while the container was being taken off the ship. Maybe it was the crane operator, maybe, who knows. But there's also theft. In certain parts of the country, theft is rather commonplace. We talk about it, it's very common in 6 cities in the United States. We talked about theft in terms of automobiles. And the used automobile trade is indeed big around the Port of New York. And there is a lot of theft. There's also a lot of theft on the piers or in warehouses of expensive items like wristwatches and like Johnny Walker Blue Label whiskey. Those items tend to, as longshoremen put it, walk. People walk away with them. And quite often people who work in warehouses are very good at spotting the boxes, the cartons that do contain expensive items. That goes getting back to packaging. It goes back to having the right kind of marks on the cartons that are being brought into the country or being exported. You don't want to put everybody on notice that whatever you have inside that container is expensive. If you do, don't be surprised if people break into the cartons and take your things. Now, shippers or exporters often fail to think about ways cargo can be damaged or lost. Now you got an idea. You're looking at a pie chart. You're looking at some of the forces, a lot of the forces that affect cargo. It happens, and it happens with great frequency. You just have to have insurance. It doesn't mean you're going to be successful with your insurance claim. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. You've got to get your claim in time. And generally speaking, you have 72 hours after the discovery of the damage to get a written claim in. You're also going to need people to help you. You've got to, in many cases, enlist the services of a surveyor What kind of damage are you claiming? When you put the initial claim in, you can make a claim that damage has occurred. You're going to retain the services of a surveyor. But again, written notice is terribly important. That's one reason why insurance companies deny claims. Insurance companies are also looking for other ways to get out of claims. One is by stating that your packaging was no good. It wasn't appropriate for the type of transportation that took place. It wasn't appropriate for all the legs of that intermodal transportation, and they'll deny. Quite often, insurance companies will often deny. They'll state that whatever happened to your goods was an act of God. And sometimes insurance companies try to get out of things by stating, well, there's many different things to state, and they do. That's why it's going to be important for you to look at some of the pages that you're going to see in a few minutes. You've got to know about cargo clauses, what you're protected for, what you're not. And then again, sometimes you'll need a rider. Whatever insurance policy you get might not be sufficient for what you're doing. If you happen to be a once-in-a-while type importer or exporter, talk to your customs broker. If you're going to be importing or exporting on a regular basis, get in touch with the insurance company. Explain yourself fully. Explain that you need coverage from the time the goods are picked up until the time they're delivered. Quite often you'll need something known as a rider. In most cases, you get a rider for just about anything. One type of rider that you may not be able to get is for examination. What happens if customs officers damage your goods while the inspection is taking place? What sort of recourse do you have? Quite often, it's none. I have seen examinations taking place with regard to reefer-related items. Quite often, at the Port of New York, frozen fish would come in from South America. A number of years before these fish shipments arrived, somebody discovered in a frozen fish shipment many years ago that there was cocaine. CBP, for whatever reason, decides to look at the same type shipments again and again and again. What happens? Well, examinations take time. Quite often the fish are no longer frozen by the time the examination ends. Who's got to pick up the tab? Quite often, depending on Incoterms, it's going to be the receiver of the goods. Is there insurance to cover such an event, a customs examination? Yes, there is, but most companies will not offer it. It would be so expensive, it's not worth thinking about. Okay, so we have business of packing, securing, and transportation of cargo is usually left to someone other than a shipper or exporter. A third party or parties handles these important functions. I told you about a book that you should get your hands on if you happen to be in a shipping game or thinking about engaging in shipping. Go to the Journal of Commerce, that's www.joc.com. We can go to a good library, what's known as a federal repository, or depository, I'm sorry. Think about the Civil Science, Industry, and Business Library, located on Madison Avenue and 33rd Street. They have a book, actually four of them. They're published by the Journal of Commerce. They're called Ticklers, Transportation Ticklers. These books contain, or they list all the parties involved in international trade at all the ports. I believe Volume 2 addresses New York. You can find out who the players are at the ports. You can find out who the carriers are, NVOCCs, ocean freight forwarders, insurance companies, surveyors, warehouse. You can find out anything you need to find out in terms of international trade. But one party you may need, or you might want to consult before all the others, is a packaging company. If you're going to be exporting, what do you know about the product that you're shipping? You may not know a lot about it. Perhaps the most important thing you can do if you're an exporter, just like you're an importer, is to know your product. You have to know how it's classified, but you also have to know how it should be packed for shipping. And if you don't know anything about boxes or cartons or so on, or dunnage, all these things we've talked about in class, get a hold of a good packing company. You don't want to have your goods damaged, and you don't need to have them stolen. Now, as mentioned in class, in the United States, theft is highly concentrated in 6 states and certain cities and truck stops. Excuse me. In particular, theft is frequent at the Port of New York. It's not as bad as it used to be, and that's because of containerization. But when we had loose cargo, what's known as break bulk, there used to be a lot of theft, and it happened because it was easy to steal. Now it's a bit more difficult, but a lot of the goods that are stolen are shipped out of the United States. Again, I mentioned automobiles. There's a lot of automobile theft in and around New York and in Jersey. That's why insurance rates are so high. A lot of cars are not shipped out when they're stolen. They're chopped up. Okay, they wind up in chop shops. And a lot of used automobile parts are exported from the United States. You know, too, that when it comes to exporting, if you're going to be transporting or having goods transported by ocean, you need to engage the services of what's known as a non-vessel operating common carrier. And that non-vessel operating common carrier middleman should be licensed by the Federal Maritime Commission. When it comes to transportation by ocean, ocean shipping is still regulated. A lot of regulation of certain modes of transportation disappeared. Trucking used to be heavily regulated. We at one time had something called the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. It's still there, but it's pretty much disappeared. Nobody really follows it. Nobody really cares. But again, there is new emphasis on trucking, and you got to understand that the number one occupation in the United States is trucking. And right now, companies are looking into driverless trucks. Even the U.S. Postal Service, which is under attack right now by President Donald Trump, is thinking about driverless trucks. Automation is making a big difference in our lives. But automation can also help in thwarting thieves. We have specialized seals on containers, and customs and your insurance company would expect you to use a good safety seal. At one time, the seals were nothing but strips of metal with a ball on the end of them, easy to clip, easy to open. Now, if you're shipping, you should use a good security seal. You can also use IT to help you. You can put cameras inside cargo containers. You can also put recorders of different types. You'll know when somebody has broken into your container or tried to or successfully have stolen your stuff. And don't assume, again, whether as to whether or not you're going to be compensated or that the person you sell to has insured the goods. Don't assume anything when it comes to insurance. And I indicated here that assume means do not make an ass out of you or me, right? Now, if your cargo is not covered sufficiently by insurance and cargo damage or total loss happens because of any of the above movements, you, whether buyer or seller, are going to have to absorb the losses. And therefore, the answer to the question, do I need cargo insurance? It's yes. I told you it's cheap. Many times it's going to be $100, $200. Not a big deal if you, in terms of what you're spending on the cargo. Insured, and both seller and buyer can have insurable interests. They both have a reason to insure the cargo being shipped, and therefore they can both have insurance policies. But if you're receiving cargo, you want to have an insurance policy in place that covers you here. You want to be able to talk to an insurance agent who's located here. And the same thing on the other side. If you're sending your goods out, the person receiving the goods wants to be able to talk to somebody in his country, just in case something goes wrong. And again, if you don't have insurance, you got to think about digging into your own pockets. And you better have deep pockets because sometimes the damage, sometimes the losses that have occurred are going to set you back. And in many cases, you take a big loss, that's the end of your importing or exporting business. Now, different types of cargo insurance. There are different types of cargo insurance. People don't really talk about it much. But for your cargo to be sufficiently covered by cargo insurance, you need any of the A, B, or C clauses that I put down. These are published by the Lloyd's Market Association and the International Underwriting Association of London. And look at C clauses. These are the risks covered. First one, loss of or damage to the subject matter insured, reasonably attributable to, and then 1.1, fire or explosion. They occasionally happen. There are fires and explosions with regard to container-loaded items. Why? Hazmat. Sometimes people don't declare it. They don't know the goods are hazardous. And if you do that, if you start sending hazmat or hazardous goods and you don't advise the shipper that that's what you're shipping, watch it. All right? There's also vessel craft being stranded, grounded, sunk, or capsized. And it occurs a lot more than you think. You've also got to think about overturning a derailment of a land conveyance. We've talked about trucks and rail cars occasionally going on their sides. It happens. You've got to think about 1.1.4, collision or contact of vessel, craft, or conveyance with any external object other than water, Quite often vessels crash into docks. It happens. You got to think about discharge of cargo at a port of distress. Sometimes goods are thrown overboard because the ship, the vessel, is having a difficult time of it. It's actually covered too under 1.2.2. It's called jettison. When you jettison, you're throwing something overboard. And I'm going to say general average for last. B clauses, risk covered. All the above plus, loss of damage is subject matter insured caused by general average, jettison or washing overboard, and there is a lot of cargo that gets washed overboard. Sometimes the seas are really rough. Every once in a while, rogue waves, whatever, it happens. And there's entry of sea, lake, or river water into a vessel, craft, hold, conveyance, container space, or place of storage. We talked about holds, vessel holds. Quite often your goods will wind up suffering water damage because the hold of the vessel has water in it. How did the hold get water in it? Maybe it was a rough storm. Maybe the hatches were open while the vessel was being loaded. It occurs. And quite often the water that's in a vessel will wind up finding its way to your goods. And then 1.3 is total loss of any package lost overboard or dropped while loading to or loading from a vessel or craft. Yes, sometimes entire containers go into the drink. Now, A clauses, these are risks covered. All risks are covered if the goods are damaged in transit and it cannot be proven that the carrier caused the damage, the shipper will not be able to recover the loss. Just because you have insurance doesn't mean you're always going to be able to recover. A lot of people think it's good. I got insurance. I have nothing to worry about. Not true. And again, that's where packaging comes into play. You got to have the right kind of packaging. But right now we're referring to all risk insurance that provides protection without having to prove carrier liability. Now, quite often when you make a claim, not only do you have to prove carrier liability, you have to prove that you're not at fault. But something that you think about, risk covered, all risk. And just remember that all risks are not all risks and that there has to have been a happening. Something has to happen that was not expected. All the clauses cover general average, and plus something called both to blame collisions in cases where containers are lost at sea due to collision of two ships. Now, many people think that because they're shipping, that somehow because they're shipping with a great big financially comfortable company, that they have nothing to worry about. If something goes wrong, they're going to be protected. After all, they're paying a lot for transportation. And you figure that, hey, the costs that I'm paying should cover my insurance. So it's not necessarily my insurance, it's the carrier's insurance. It's in place and I have nothing to worry about. Well, sure, you can argue that the carrier, whether it's a trucker, rail line, steamship line, whatever, may have own insurance covered. And you can claim for damages from the carrier for any damage that happened while the cargo was in their care. Well, all I have to say to you is lots of luck. Not really. This is not going to happen. The carrier's cargo liability insurance covers a carrier against their liability loss to the customer's goods during transit. But this goods in transit, or GIT insurance, is specifically structured to insure the carrier's liability rather than the goods itself. Its insurance is for the carrier, not you. And these policies usually limit the carrier's liability, and these liabilities limits may usually be found in the terms and conditions advised to you by the carrier on their GIT cover. What you've got to do when you're shipping, you've got to turn over the bill of lading. There are terms and conditions on the back. If anybody's ever read the terms and conditions, you'll know that the font size is exceedingly small, maybe 8, even below that. It's tiny, but in there, nestled into the paragraphs, you're going to find language that indicates that the carrier is only going to be limited to $500 US for your container. That's it. $500. You may have tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands, or $1 million worth of goods in your container. You don't have insurance, even if it's the carrier's problem, you're only going to get $500. That's not a lot of money. It's not even worth filling out the paperwork to make the claim. So unless your shipment is covered sufficiently by cargo insurance, you may have a situation where you sold the goods to the buyer, and the buyer may have paid for it, or may not have yet paid for it, but you failed to secure insurance coverage on the goods. Now you learn that the goods are completely damaged, and you got to think now, it could be total loss. The goods are worthless. Eventually, you might wind up paying the buyer back. You may lose money on your shipment. You may risk the loss of future business, and you may even have to contemplate bankruptcy. What this means is get insurance, okay? Sometimes it's an uphill battle, but if you don't have it, you're not going anywhere. Conclusion, cargo can be damaged or lost at any time during its journey from the supplier's warehouse to the final receiver. That's why when talking to the insurance company, you want warehouse to warehouse. Cargo damage, as we talked about, may happen while cargo is in the possession of the seller, while cargo is being packed into a container, while cargo is being loaded onto a truck, while cargo is in transit by sea, road, or rail, while cargo is being offloaded at delivery, while cargo is in the possession of the buyer, and so on and so on. Damage can happen anytime, really under any conditions. And the damage, in most cases, is caused by bad weather. Sometimes vessels get themselves into a world of hurt. Oceans are not necessarily a place where you want to be during a bad storm. And containers do fall off the ships. And I advise you to go to YouTube sometime. Just type in lost containers or containers into ocean. There's plenty of videos. Quite often damage is caused by misdeclaration. Sometimes containers are overloaded. Somebody's put too much weight in them. That's a problem these days, but it's one that the carriers, the steamship companies are carrying or catching. Years ago, people did hand in containers or did tender overloaded containers to the carrier. They accepted them. Now, again, a lot of times they will not do this, and it's up to you. If you misdeclare, you can get into a world of trouble yourself. And not only weight is a problem when it comes to containers, but so is carrying anything that's hazardous. And that's why you have to know your product. If it's hazardous, you're going to have to take special precautions, and special paperwork is going to be required too. The shipper needs to know what is in the container. Quite often the shipper does not know. We're talking about the carrier, that is. The carrier does not know because the shipper's load and count. The steamship company is not there when you're loading your container. You know what's in the container, but how is the carrier supposed to know? And if you fail to declare, that's a real problem. So again, think about your product. You've got to know it. If you don't know the product, find somebody who does know about your product. Don't be afraid to consult an engineer, a scientist. Go back to the manufacturer of the product. Whatever it is, you've got to take a little time out to learn about your product. All right, let's take a 2-minute break, and then we're going to go on to another topic. We'll be back in a minute. Yeah, we want that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our next topic, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about house bills of lading and master bills of lading. It's come up in class a couple of times. What's a bill of lading? How does a house bill of lading differ from a master bill of lading? Well, I put down some definitions, and I encourage you, if you don't know what a bill of lading is, you can go to a website. You go to www.fmc.gov. FMC meaning Federal Maritime Commission. All right, good place to go to. You may actually find a potential employer for you at that website. And you can go through the site and you can find out who all the NVOCCs are in your neighborhood. You can do city by city, state by state. And then I told you too, if you forget everything and you're not sure what to do when it comes to exporting, you're not sure of documentation, anything related to shipping, go to export.gov. Okay, good place to go. When you forget everything, export.gov. Now, bills of lading. A bill of lading may be issued as a house bill of lading or a master bill of lading. Now, a house bill of lading, an HBL, is issued by an NVOCC operator. NVOCC stands for what? non-vessel operating common carrier. It's a shipping company that does not have ships. Today, NVOCCs are also known as ocean transportation intermediaries. And you can find out about ocean transportation intermediaries on the FMC website. I'll explain what they do. But they're middlemen. If you're going to be exporting, importing, you would contact an NVOCC. You wouldn't go directly to what's known as a VOCC. That's a vessel operating common carrier. That's actually a company that has ships. And we'll think about Big Blue, Maersk, or we can think about Mediterranean shipping, or we can think about Evergreen. We can think about any number of companies that have ships. But chances are you're not going to deal with them, nor would they want to deal with you. They would find you to be too small to deal with. That's why you go to an NVOCC. But again, remember, if you're ever shipping by water, make certain that you choose a company, an NVOCC, that is licensed by the FMC. Now, we know that a house bill of lading is issued by an NVOCC. What's this master bill of lading? Well, a master bill of lading is issued by the steamship or shipping line. As you heard in class, we still refer to shipping lines as steamship lines, although there have been steamships in the last 150 years. But we still call them, well, not 150, but maybe 100 years. That's the carrier, also known as the VOCC. I've talked a little about vessel operating common carrier. What they do is they have a relationship with the NVOCC. The NVOCC buys containers or rents containers and then sells them to companies here in the US for purposes of stuffing and sending the goods out of the country. But a master bill of lading is issued by the big carrier, the big boy. And that could be, as I mentioned, it could be Maersk, as I said, MSC, any of the big companies. And the NVOCC will issue a house bill of lading. Now, when issued for an FCL, that's a full container load shipment, also known as non-groupage. This is all industry talk. A house bill of lading should always be issued on a back-to-back basis with a master bill of lading. This means that the house bill of lading should be an exact replica of the master bill of lading issued by the actual steamship line. With respect to all details except these: shipper, consignee, and notified party. That's really the difference between the house bill of lading and the master bill of lading. They're identical, except when it comes to shipper, consignee, and notified party. But house bills issued by NVOCCs, master bills issued by the big boys, the VOCCs. And again, where you're going to find out about the terms and conditions I've been talking about, turn over the bills of lading. That's where all the fine print is, and that's what you should be reading. If you're shipping by ocean, and I've seen it happen with people who've been shipping for decades, they never bother to read the terms and conditions. They just can't be bothered, or they can't understand the language. It's not very difficult. You now know how to speak the way people in the industry do. You know that a container is called a box. You know what a steamship line is, and you know what master bills of lading are. The house bill of lading, just a few bullet points with the house bill of lading. The shipper will usually be the actual shipper or exporter of the cargo. That is, let's say you were the exporter. You would get in touch with an NVOCC. I used to work for an NVOCC, one that was global, but one that was located on the other side of the river in Jersey. And we were middlemen. We would help people export their goods. We had offices all over the place. And the company had been in existence since the 1980s, a shipping company without ships. But we would issue to the person who booked with us, that is, asked for a container from us, we would issue what's known as a house bill of lading. And the consignee will usually be the actual receiver or importer of the cargo. And the notified party could be the same as the consignee. The house bill of lading would show the NVOCC's name on it, and the consignee would be the actual receiver of the goods. Not a heck of a lot different from the master bill of lading. All the details about the container, that would all be there. What type of container would be shipped out, whether it would be a 40-footer. We talked about the container, the alphanumeric numbers that are used in connection with containers. All the usual language, the MBL and the HBL were the same, except for shipper, consignee, notified. Again, the master bill of lading. The shipper will usually be the NVOCC. On a master bill of lading would show that Maersk was the Was the vessel operating common carrier, the carrier would actually had the ships, well, the shipper would be listed, and we would be, the NVOCC would be put down as the shipper. The carrier would be Maersk, the shipper would be the NVOCC, the middleman, and the consignee would usually be the destination agent or the counterpart of the office of the NVOCC operator or the freight forwarder. And the notified party could be the same as the consignee. In the interest of the NVOCC operator and their insurance coverage or exposure, it is recommended that all details on the house bill of lading and the master bill of lading, like the vessel and voyage information, the cargo description, number of containers, seal numbers, weights, measurements, again, they remain the same. The only difference should concern the shipper, the consignee, and the notified details. Now, unless disallowed by the LC, that's letter of credit, also known as a documentary credit, the house bill of lading is also used or treated as a negotiable instrument. Negotiable meaning that you can transfer title and can be considered to fulfill the roles of a bill of lading. But remember this, due care must be taken that when using the house bill of lading as a negotiable instrument, you've got to be careful. I've come across a number of times the counterproductive and dangerous practice of creating or consigning the house bill of lading and the master bill of lading exactly the same. That means there are two sets of bills of lading issued by two different entities to the same cargo. You can read about this. There are places to go online. You can also go to YouTube. There's a number of pretty good videos with regard to MBLs and house bills of lading. All right, and you can also get more information about these documents, export.gov, and go to fmc.gov. All right. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take another minute out, and then we're going to come back and we're going to address another topic. Board yet? No. I think that's us. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back for a related topic, new topic, but a very related one. And you may have heard the term telex release. That is, if you're in the shipping business, if you're working with an ocean shipper, or you're involved in ocean exporting or ocean importing, you may have heard this day-to-day work. You may have heard this in class. I don't know if I've talked about telexes. Or you may have heard it sometime in your life concerning ocean container shipping. What's a telex release? In some instances, a shipper or an exporter may surrender one or all of the original bills of lading that have been issued to him at the loading or load port. Based on this surrender, the shipper or exporter will instruct the load port agent to advise the discharge port agent, that's the guy across the ocean, that the cargo covered under the surrendered bills of lading can be released. Generally speaking, your person is not going to get cargo an ocean away or at the place of delivery unless bills of lading are surrendered. They're somehow given up. Basically, they represent okay, take your cargo now type of documents. The only time that they can be released in many situations is when the bills of lading are given up. Somebody signs the back of them and a transfer takes place. In many ways, you're talking about a transfer of possession, in some cases title, and that's accomplished by using the bills of lading. A bill of lading serves a number of different functions. It's a contract of carriage. That is, it indicates the carrier has something in its possession that belongs to somebody, and that item or items is being transported. But it can also be used, bill of lading, as a negotiable instrument, meaning that a transfer of not only possession, but of title can take place under certain circumstances. What's a telex release? A telex release is simply a message conveying this instruction from the load port agent to the discharge agent. In other words, the cargo is good to go as soon as the person on the other side receives it. As soon as the consignee gets the goods, okay, no bills of lading are required. Now, when is a telex release in order? And this is something we've got to think about. The shipper or exporter would request a telex release under the circumstances below. The consignee, that's the receiver at destination, is a counterpart office of the shipper. In other words, the shipper and the receiver are related, or they're the same. And that could be DHL, Global Forwarding, DHL. DHL is the shipper shown on the bill of lading, and it's consigning some cargo to its office overseas. Think of this as shipping as from DHL to DHL. Since no negotiation is involved, there's no reason for the original bill of lading to be surrendered at destination. DHL is DHL. Again, a bill of lading is used to safeguard or to make certain that somebody gets paid. Generally speaking, if there's no negotiation, if there's no payment involved, or if payment is done on, or if it's an open account involved, what's the point of using a bill of lading? So the shipper did not process his documentation in time, and the ship that is carrying his cargo has already reached, is just about to reach the destination port. The original bills will not reach the consignee in time for them to clear before the expiration or the expiry of the free time. Well, that's when a telex order may be involved. The bills of lading are not going to make it to the other side, or not in time. Why have the goods hang around on a pier or on the terminal? Why not just say, for the seller, why not say to the people overseas, okay, you're not going to need the original bills of lading. They're not going to make it to you one time. We're going to do this by way of a telex release. And NVOCC, non-vessel operating common carrier, might request a telex release from the steamship line so that the NVOCC can issue its house bill of lading to its customer. It's just a way of doing an end run around surrendering a bill of lading. Right, many of the shippers or exporters that fit the description are found in circumstance number 1, and they use express release instead of a telex release. Is there a difference between telex release and express release? Yes, there is a difference between a telex release and an express release, but most people don't know, or they don't notice the difference. Technically, a telex release can only happen, my typing error, can only happen when the bill of lading is issued as a straight bill of lading and not as a negotiable bill of lading. A straight bill of lading really just means that, hey, the goods are going to be released as soon as the consignee receives them overseas. A negotiable order or a bill or a seaway bill requires a signature. There are, however, some lines that allow telex release on a negotiable order bill of lading. It's kind of unusual, but I just want to get why a telex release? Where did the name come from? And again, we're going to drift back in time a little bit. And telex is the acronym for Telegraph Exchange Service. Does anybody really use a telegraph? The US military no longer requires service people to even know the Morse code anymore. Even the military gave up on the Morse code. But again, we're talking about telegraphs. And a number of years ago, it wasn't that long ago, but some of you may not have been born when people were using telegraphs, a telegraph service. And the machine shown in the picture is what's known as a telex machine, which is a teleprinter which can send and receive text-based messages using the telegraph service. It wasn't done by Morse code. However, it's an ancient piece of technology. We still refer to it as telex. A message sent using the telex machine is known as a telex message. A telex service could be used for real-time one-on-one communication with someone on the other side of the world, or it could be used to send a previously drafted message. Telex was one of the most popular methods for communicating with ships while at sea, and may be considered as the precursor to email communication. So you're looking at what was before there was a PC. Great. The release instruction from the point of lading to the point of discharge is called a telex release. because in the past, such release instructions with discharge port used to be sent using a telex machine. Now you'd have to go to a museum to find one. Now, in its heydays, the telex machine was used to transmit more than just cargo release instructions. Many people, like myself, may remember having used the telex machine for the transmission of regular messages to ships, preparing and sending reports before, during, and after a ship's operation. And here are some examples: arrival reports, container load lists, etc. But nowadays, an ocean bill of lading, surrender information, release instructions, they're sent by email, or they're updated in the steamship's line's online system. But we still use the word telex in the industry, just like we're still using the word shipper's export declaration, or XDEC, when it comes to an electronic transfer of information. At one time we had a paper form, the 7525. It's also been relegated to the museum, but we still use the term XDEC when referring to what's now known as an EEI, or electronic export information filing. Fascinating. All right, take another minute. We're going to address another topic. Okay, new topic or related topic, just in case you feel you haven't had enough agony on a Friday afternoon. I'm going to be talking about demurrage and detention. And a lot of you have heard these terms. They're confusing, not well understood in the real world, and something that you need to know about. I mentioned Incoterms 2010, you've got to know about them. And you should know the difference between demurrage and detention, although in certain parts of the world, at certain ports, there really is no difference. All right, but we're going to talk about differences, and it does matter. And you've got to know a little bit about the two terms and what they mean. Import demurrage, export detention. Import demurrage and detention are some of the terms that importers, exporters, and freight forwarders come across on a regular basis. Quite often they come across these terms and they don't understand them. There seems to be a lot of confusion in understanding the difference between demurrage and detention, and there is. And this is one of the most frequently asked questions relating to a container shipment. What's the difference? Meaning, what's the difference between demurrage and detention? Now, shipping and freight can be full of surprises and variables in terms of cost for a customer. And any time that you hear these terms, demurrage and detention, think money. And again, demurrage and detention be quite expensive. Now, in a lot of cases, these costs may be highly prohibitive, to the extent of some customers abandoning cargoes at destinations because of costs. These money, just keeps accumulating when you're dealing with demurrage and detention. In the context of containerized cargo, demurrage and detention must be understood clearly. These two terms can become huge and costly problems for customers who do not or cannot control their shipments properly and effectively. And demurrage and detention are mostly associated with imports, although they may be associated with exports. Some of you, if you're exporting, may experience export detentions. Customs is becoming a lot more, well, a lot more active in that area. It's expanding its turf. Customs has traditionally been concerned only with imports. The last couple of years, that has now changed. Many of you have, you're taking export controls and licenses. The class that we're concerned with, this one is logistics, but many of you are taking export regulations and documentation. Exporting is now a big deal, and it can cost you money. Again, demurrage and detention, mostly thinking about imports, but both sides of the aisle. Now, what is demurrage and detention? Why are they charged and who charges for them and who pays? These are the questions you've got to be asking yourself when you hear these terms being used. Although the most common market practice is to combine demurrage and detention, that's done all the time. It's important to know the difference between demurrage and detention. And I have down what is demurrage, and I give a definition. Demurrage is a charge levied by the steamship line to the importer in cases where the party has not taken delivery of the full container, not the partial, the full container, and moved it out of the port or terminal area for unpacking within allowed free days. Free days is often known as free time. I give an example here. An example is an ocean container is discharged from a ship on May 2nd. The consignee approaches the steamship line to take delivery of the cargo on May 12th. If we consider the standard free days offered by the steamship line, again, different to port free days, as 7 days, and that would be very, that would be very permissive. At 7 days from the date of discharge, the free days will expire on May 8th. As of May 12th, the box, and that's what ocean containers are called in the industry, would have been sitting in the port or at the port terminal for a total of 11 days. 11 days, also known as dwell time. You take the 11 days dwell time and you minus 7 days free days, it's going to leave you with 4 days. The box has overstayed its welcome at the port or terminal for 4 days. This means that the line will be eligible to charge the consignee, the person receiving, demurrage for 4 days, from May 9th to May 12th, at a rate that's fixed by the line. And you can be certain it's going to be expensive. Well, what's detention? Detention is a charge levied by the steamship or shipping line to the importer in cases where the importer has not taken the full container for unpacking, let's say within the 3 days, but has not returned the empty container to the nominated empty depot before the expiry or the expiration of the 3 days allowed. So it's a non-return. It was given a container and hasn't brought it back empty. And we have an example under this. And this is a customer who took a full box out of the port of the terminal on July 7th, which is within the free days, which expires on July 8th, but returned the empty container to the line's nominated depot a lot later, on July 19th. Therefore, the line will be eligible to charge the consignee detention for the 11 days from July 9th. That's after the expiry of the expiration of the 3 days of free time, until July 19th. At a rate fixed by the line. Sorry for the typo. This can be expensive. If you request additional free days from the steamship line, we usually ask if the request is for A, demurrage, or B, detention. Steamship lines they want to know, are you talking about demurrage or are you talking about detention? The line wants to ascertain whether the customer is going to be keeping the container with them before or after moving out of the port or terminal. And please note, at various destination ports, the definitions of demurrage and detention vary. Hence, the line needs to know where the exposure lies. Shipping lines very rarely offer free days for either demurrage or demurrage only or detention only. If the free days is shown as just free days, it usually refers to a combined demurrage detention, which is what most of the shipping lines apply. And then again, I have something in the box. If X free days offered for demurrage only, then that means that the client has so many days or X free days to pick up the full container, after which the empty has to be returned the same day to avoid costs. And if X free days offer detention only, then that means that the client can use the whatever number of free days to unpack the container and take it back to the depot. The client may have some unpacking problems at its warehouse, the problem which necessitates this request. There is a difference, but realize in the real world, many times people combine the terms. But you got to know, and if you're having problems, you got to know the difference. And you got to talk to buyer. If you're the seller, you should know what the buyer thinks demurrage and detention is. And now you have reference. If you get what this means, look at the handout you're going to be receiving. And again, you can also go to export.gov. They'll help you with this problem. All right, let's take another minute. We're going to come back to another topic. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, another topic. This has to do with calculating. You may want to get your calculators out or get out a number 2 pencil. You're not going to need to. I'm going to show you where you can go online. You can figure out how to calculate. And there's also, you go online and find that this calculation sheet's available. I'm just going over something that's very basic. And one of the most common questions I get asked, or I used to get asked, is this one. How do I calculate CBM and freight ton? And this is or was commonly asked by those clients who get charged or got charged per freight ton or revenue ton. You know that CBM stands for cubic meter. And this is the most common unit used for the measurement of volumetric cargo. Metric ton, you should know this, it refers to the weight of cargo. 1 metric ton equals 1,000 kilograms. Freight ton or revenue ton is derived by calculating the weight or the volume of the cargo, and the freight is charged based on whichever is higher. And then if you look at below, yes, we have volume weight. Just threw that in there just to gussy up the handout. And we're going to go to a new page. And here it is. When you have dimensions of the package, first convert the measurement into meters. As you've heard before, the United States and Palau in the Pacific Ocean are the only 2 places left on the planet where people are still using the English system. Even the English got rid of the English measurement system. Why put up with hands and feet and arms and spans and what have you? We still do, but when it comes to international trade, international shipping, everybody has to be familiar with the metric system. And on occasion, you will be called to convert. You may have to go from English to metric. You should be able to do that. And these are the dimensions you're going to have to deal with. Normally, dimensions are length times width times height. If, for example, dimensions of a cargo crate are 3.2 times 1.2 times 2.2 meters, then the CBM is simply 3.2 times 1.2 times 2.2, which gives you 8.448 cubic meters. If the rate's quoted as, for example, United States dollars, we're talking about $12 per freight ton, and the weight of the package is 1,200 kilograms or 1.2 tons, then the freight rate for this will be 8.44 cubic meters times US dollars equals, and they come out with a figure 101.376 or 1.2 tons times 12.212, which gives you, in terms of US dollars, 14.4. Since the CBM rate is higher, the freight rate of US dollars is, well, it's going to be 101.376 will apply. And again, if you want to spend any time on conversion, which I don't think you want to do on a Friday afternoon, go to omnilineconversion.com, and you can spend a lot of time there and play with the metric system, do your conversions, find out how to make things cubic meters, and it should solve all your calculation-related problems. That's all I want to bring your attention to. Okay, the next matter we're going to go to right away. And we're going to take this up on next class, next and final class, because warehousing is a part of logistics. It's a basic element of logistics and supply chain. And warehousing is very important. Some of you may have been in warehouses. We talked one class about how warehouses do differ. And where you warehouse an item does make a difference. We talked about contamination. Quite often your goods get contaminated because you placed them in the wrong warehouse. And in addition to warehousing in general, I want to direct your attention to customs bonded warehouses, and I've also mentioned free or foreign trade zones. We'll talk about that on Monday. But right now, I just wanted to see the warehousing. And on Monday, we're also going to be talking about inventory control, which is also part of logistics. And we're going to talk a little bit about reverse logistics. And that's just, again, simply logistics in reverse. What happens if you get stuck with the returned items or items that don't function? What do? You got to take that into account when you're in business. You'll have to warehouse. You're going to have inventory. How does inventory control happen? There are some analysis that you should know about. And what do you do in the case when goods come back? But right now, just want to mention a little bit about warehousing. This is another important part of an organization's logistics function. Warehousing must receive, store, move, and ship materials or products. And this includes internal movement and shipping to other locations such as distribution centers or customers. And the people who manage the warehousing function are responsible for the following tasks. And I've boiled this down. Number one, the movement of materials and products. Two, storage of materials or products. And three, managing information associated with those activities. Now, when it comes to movement, the warehouse personnel must receive material products from within the company and move it to a storage location. In effect, that's what supply chain management is all about. You're just talking about how do you get something to your customer? Logistics or transportation is a big function of supply chain management. Logistics, as you know, this course can stand on its own in terms of transportation, in terms of warehousing, in terms of inventory management, reverse logistics. They can be studied itself. And you can study logistics. You can study it not just for one semester. You can study it for many, many semesters. It's terribly important, and it's changing. And the type of movements, the type of shipping is changing all the time. It's kind of an interesting time. It can also be a very worrisome time for certain people. But warehouse personnel must receive material products from within the company, and they got to move it to a storage location. And warehouse personnel must also receive and store goods and materials from outside the company. And this includes unloading goods or materials from trucks. You got to record receipts of, have recording receipt of the goods and materials. And you got to move goods and materials to a storage location. And warehouse personnel must assemble or pick those products that need to be grouped together to fulfill a customer order and get it ready for shipment. And warehouse personnel must also be responsible for break bulk tasks. And these are needed when large quantities of material products got to be broken down into smaller quantities. Also, storage. Quite often, products and materials have to be stored for a long time. In other cases, it's just a short time. But in today's manufacturing environment, materials received that are going into the production cycle are usually stored for short periods before moving directly from the point of use in the manufacturing or the assembly process. You've heard of just-in-time. I'm sure you've had courses where it's been discussed. But most large-scale manufacturing operations, a traditional warehouse full of parts waiting to be sent into production, no longer exists. And if you've been reading in the newspapers, even stores no longer exist. Target stores are getting smaller. Sears going out of business. We got J.C. Penney's disappearing. Everything is changing. The president, again, is on the warpath, not just in terms of tariffs on Chinese goods, but he doesn't like Amazon. He has a beef with the president of the company. And he's also talking about big changes in terms of the postal service. Now, in U.S. order plans, there may be no more than a few hours worth of inventory inside inside the warehouse. Can't be right with you. Number two. All right, but in most cases, what they're depending upon, I'm sorry, there seems to be a page missing from here. We'll talk about it. But what happens is, it's just a few hours worth of inventory. Nothing is really stored. You're not going to find racks full of goods waiting to be used from now on. You're not going to find production the way it used to exist. Today, some figures came out about employment in the United States. What's happening in terms of the manufacturing sector? Well, in all sectors of the U.S. economy, it turns out that there was maybe 130,000, I think 103,000 people hired in a month. That's miserable, all right? But manufacturing has changed here. And manufacturing, you don't have a lot of people waiting around just receiving goods and then going to an assembly line or going to an area, production area to make things. That's not happening. Robots are taking over. There's a lot more automation these days. But most things are just in time, and when the goods are not available, they'll be shipped into the the warehouse. Again, finished goods sometimes are stored until they're shipped to the customers, and this could be stock awaiting shipment. And on Monday, we're going to talk about information management. We're going to talk about information gathering, tracking, and reporting, and there's a bunch of YouTube videos that I'd like you to view. I'm going to send you a homework assignment as well. But the YouTube videos I'd like you to see are with regard to warehousing. There's one entitled, and you'll receive the handout for it. It's what is logistics and warehouse systems from design and service. There's another one on warehouse management systems, and there's another one on logistics and distribution structure. Some of the stuff can be deadly dull, but I think the videos that are available by way of YouTube should be able to hold your attention, which is something difficult to do on a Friday afternoon. What I'll do is I'm going to call things quit. I'm going to quit right now. I hope you're not too offended. I want you to have a good weekend. I'm going to send you a homework assignment. Not going to be too much heavy lifting, but I'd like you to look at some of the videos in terms of warehousing and to get prepared to listen to me on Monday or next class, logistics on Tuesday, talk about inventory management. And it's something that a lot of you may not have thought about, but there's a call for people who can manage inventory again. Just in time is so very important these days. Whatever we had in place in terms of old warehousing doesn't exist for the most part anymore. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for putting up with me. I'll see you on Tuesday. You'll get a bunch of handouts. I'll give you the homework assignment, and have a good weekend. Thanks a lot.